Musical Talk, the UK independent musical theatre podcast.
Welcome to this week's episode of Musical Talk with our very own female Thos. Hello, Antonia.
Hi.
as Michael, whom you heard last week, described her as. Speaking of last week, we looked at the first half of the history of, well, a potted history of the Hollyood musical. We're going to continue on from the 60s onwards. There is rather a lot to cover, and there's more than you think, isn't there?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even though the genre starts to decline throughout the 60s, there's still quite a lot to talk about. There are still movie musicals being made, particularly as we get into like the 90s and the noughties. There's still there are a lot of very important films made, but there's a lot of things you don't expect as well, particularly in the 70s, and that's quite exciting.
Speaking of things you don't expect, we're going to talk about the award-winning La La Land, aren't we?
Yes. So we are recording this the day after the Oscars and the huge controversy of the Best Picture award accidentally being awarded to La La Land instead of Moonlight, which was kind of a little bit odd, don't you think? Because La La Land was hugely tipped to win the Oscar. So
not by me, it wasn't.
No, but by pretty much everybody else and critics and things like that. Even though a lot of critics thought actually Moonlight should win.
I still don't think the songs are good enough. Now you haven't seen the film yet, but you've still listened to the soundtrack. Yeah. What did you think? Well,
I'm not a big fan of the song that won the Oscar. I think it's just a bad Coldplay song almost. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of got that.
It's not even a good Coldplay song.
Yeah,
it's a bad
Coldplay song. It's got this kind of I can't even describe it. It's just not interesting. I would have probably liked the song from Moana to win more. It's a little bit more exciting. And
well, even the opening number of La La Land is better than whatever.
Oh yeah. So I mean, yeah, that is more interesting, and I think that would have been maybe a better choice. I don't know, but I don't know. I like you say.
Are you going to see it still?
I am going to see it still. Obviously, I've not seen it yet again. But I was saying to you, out of all the things nominated for Best Picture and some of the bigger films that have been, up for awards, it's not the first film I want to see, even as a musical theatre singer. There are films which are much, much more interesting to me.
But to quote someone from a couple of episodes ago, I can't wait to see it. I'm so excited.
Yeah,
it's retro, it's a musical, it looks wonderful, it looks glam.
Yeah, exactly. So I think some of it's
and then I saw it and you changed your mind.
Well, I did tell you not to try and influence me, but at the same time, I've just been battered by people going, no, it's terrible, you don't want to see this film. Well, I'm still trying to go into it with an open mind. I might actually, you never know, I might end up actually loving the film, but just from hearing the songs, I just think they're really lackluster. So what I'm thinking now is potentially that if they're going to do a film which harkens back to that golden Hollywood era, the Hollywood. If it harkens back to that Hollywood era, then the songs have got to be as good, if not better. And for me, the songs aren't good.
And as we said with Michael, they just weren't good enough. Yeah.
There's some films that have been up for awards which I'm just much more interested in seeing, like Hidden Figures. I'm really interested in seeing because it's about a topic which is interesting. Women that were black women that were uncredited until relatively recently for their work that they did on the space race. And Moonlight looks incredible. I was really happy with a lot of the winners for like Best Actress and things like that.
Yes.
I don't think Emma Stone should have won the Best Actress Oscar for that performance in particular. Apparently singing though seems to clinch you an award if we're thinking about Anne Hathaway and
singing, using the term loosely there.
Yeah. Mind you, that makes me laugh because I watched Florence Foster Jenkins recently, and Meryl Streep, who was also up for a Best Oscar Award, had to learn a lot of opera arias. Okay, she had to sing them badly, but it takes a skill to sing them badly and to learn things like the Queen of the Night aria. To learn things like the Queen of the Night aria and some opera arias, which are really difficult, and to try and sing them.
She's a wonderful mimic. I think we saw her sing in Mamma Mia, and she did The Winner Takes It All very well, all in one take apparently. She's established as a singer, whereas Emma Stone and Emma Watson are not. Let's go back on topic to our the history of the musical. We are going to come back to La La Land because it's sort of all full circle, doesn't it?
Yeah, because the reason we're having this discussion is because La La Land has been praised by the critics and it's brought the musical back into the public imagination and consciousness. So we kind of wanted to look at how the genre's developed up to La La Land and whether La La Land's anything new or whether it's kind of a continuation of lots of other musical films and trends that have been happening.
So we left at the 50s with rock and roll about to burst onto the scene, and we talked about the Hays Code, and we talked about the golden age of Hollywood. The 60s was a really interesting time, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, it's a time of huge change, because like the 20s was a time of huge change after the First World War, the 60s, there's a big boom in culture. Rock and roll becomes huge, and there's a lot of it's a good time to be young, basically. You have to think about how the Hollywood musical fits into this era. There are a lot of young rock and roll obsessed youths around, and does the traditional Hollywood musical appeal to them? I think the answer is no, it doesn't. And that's why you see a lot of films, musical films like the Elvis films, the Cliff Richard films, the Tommy Steele films, the Beatle films, to try and modernise the Hollywood musical to bring it to a new audience.
And also to get people into the cinemas.
Yeah, to get people into the cinemas. I mean, I'm not saying there weren't any big musical hits in this era. There absolutely were, and there was still a lot of stage-to-screen adaptations of popular Broadway musicals, because, I mean, the audience hadn't just completely died out as soon as it got to 1960. But I think there was an older audience that perhaps still had an appetite for the Hollywood musical, but they would be quickly being replaced by this rock and roll obsessed youth. I think potentially that golden Hollywood film would not appeal to the youth of the day, and I think that's the problem in the 60s. The other thing in the 60s, I think, as well, is the development of other film genres as well, and I think this is a thing we start to see towards the end of the 60s more, is this shift towards realism. And I don't know whether musical films really fit into this. Do they really? Because they're stylized and over the top. Yeah, exactly. They're not realistic. So this shift towards realism, the musical film doesn't really fit in with that. So you can kind of see why they kind of fell out of popularity as well.
So we get to see a lot more diegetic stuff. Like, I know we're zooming forward to the 70s, but Cabaret is a good example of that, where they strip all the book numbers away and just have the songs be part of the moment. Yeah,
just bursting into song for no reason is a little bit odd when you've kind of got a lot of films that are coming out which are very realistic. I think some of this is down to the fact of the Hays Code ending in the 1960s, the end of 1960s. So studios had a lot of competition with TV. So I think movies had to move on in a way from that musical genre and become a little bit more experimental and a little bit more exciting and appealing to get people out of their homes into movie theatres and away from their televisions and actually watching movies. Like I say, a lot of this is down to the end of the Hays Code, because up until that point, I mean, if we talked about the Hays Code in the last episode.
Yeah, just sum it up quickly.
The Hays Code basically stopped certain things from being showed on screen. It was like censorship. So that
it's like a sort of 20th century version of Oliver Cromwell.
Yeah, sort of, for Hollywood films. There were certain things that you were not allowed to show on screen, for example, childbirth and violence and guns and things like that, and sex. And a lot of dance numbers were used as a substitute for love scenes, because you were allowed to dance, but you weren't allowed to make love on screen. Obviously, this isn't realistic. And studios probably stuck quite rigidly to the Hays Code up until about the 50s, even though it was still in existence to 1968. But they found ways to get around it.
Yes, and if you're a keen fan of musical films, you would be saying, but hang on, Nick and Tonya, how is it that West Side Story gets made in 1961, which has violence and other such joys in life?
I mean, the Hays Code is still there, but studios, they find ways to get around it. So West Side Story is an interesting one. I think they start to justify certain things in the late 50s and 60s if they enhance the story, for example. So I don't think a scene of gratuitous violence would have made it into the film, but a scene that would enhance the storyline. For example, Tony has to die at the end of West Side Story, so he has to die somehow. So the studio probably got around it somehow.
But there was a gun.
There is a gun, but at the same time there are lots of other things which do fit in with the Hays Code. For example, a lot of the fight scenes and a lot of the violence is shown in a really stylistic way through dance, so that still fits in with this Hays Code idea of the 40s and 50s and only being able to show certain things through dance. But you still see a gun, and guns were not allowed to be shown on screen. You still see a gun, but you don't see any blood. It's not graphic, so they're finding ways to get around it, but they're still they're not showing explicit violence, but it's there. And there's a rape scene as well, which is incredibly horrible to watch, despite the fact that it's not explicit. And I think sometimes it's that because it's not explicit, it's almost worse, for me anyway. The Hays Code was eventually replaced by the Motion Picture Association of America, which rates, similar to the British system of rating films.
Except R1 makes sense.
Yeah. You can see why films just don't fit into this new sort of
world.
Yeah, of kind of slightly more explicit and realistic films. So there's still musical films made in this era. There are still hits. For example, you get West Side Story in 1961, which was a Best Picture Oscar winner. But you also see a huge amount of flops. We get Camelot, which was a huge flop. Hello, Dolly.
I like Camelot.
You know, if you look at box office figures and the way that the audience responded to the film, it's not successful. Sweet Charity and Mame all really kind of...
Sweet Charity is interesting because that is so out there as a film. Have you ever seen it?
I know the music, but I've never seen the film.
It's the most bizarre. It's got like racist Chinese characters in it, and it's got...
Could it be too out there though?
Possibly. It's just absolutely bizarre, but it's got some good songs in it, as we all know.
Yeah, but, you know, because of these flops, I mean, obviously not those 4 flops, but there were more flops during the era. And there were some flops during the 50s as well, like Brigadoon, for example. You know, studios start to suffer, and they can't have units dedicated to releasing, you know, and producing musical films because they lose money. And also, so towards the end of the 60s, well, during the 60s, we see awful lot of talent die. I mean, we had Judy Garland die in 1969, and Marilyn Monroe died in 1962.
They were also young as well, weren't they?
Yeah, I mean, Marilyn Monroe was 36 when she died. Patsy Cline was 30. It's really sad when you think about it like that. They done the late 50s, there's a lot of Marilyn Monroe films, and big ones like Something Like It Hot, and you do wonder whether there might have been a few more during the 60s if she'd been alive, you know, because she was huge in Hollywood. She was a huge sex symbol. She was really popular, and she would have financed. I can see that she would have got films financed, but she died sadly. There was also a lot of Hollywood film stars like Gene Kelly that found their contracts, ran out towards the end of the 60s, and Debbie Reynolds ran out in the early 70s, I think, and when she was in her late 30s. And when you're in your late 30s as an actress in Hollywood, the film roles there for you, so their contracts weren't renewed, so there just wasn't the talent as well. I think that's some of it as well.
There also wasn't the creative talent.
I think a lot of people flocked back to Broadway, you know, so I think that's... maybe Gene Kelly did, he went back to the stage, so...
And Broadway was changing so much in the 60s, and especially in the 70s.
Because of what they were allowed to show on stage.
Yeah. But also with the concept shows from Sondheim and Camden Ebb and things, that it lent itself more to theatre than to film. Now, what one would think the 70s was a bit of a dead period for film musicals, but I found the 70s really interesting.
Well, but off the top of our head, we were like, what happened in the 70s? We're like, there's only 2 we can think of.
A lot of brown sofas and sideburns.
But I mean, in musicals, I was like, really? I can't really think of anything.
Rocky Horror Show, and that's it.
And and Cabaret, and that was it. And we were like, but when we looked into it, we were like, how wrong are we? We were so wrong.
Only we'd used our pure imagination.
Indeed. There's been the decline of the musical film during the 60s, but there are still some hits. But in the 70s, it's much more... You can't predict what's going to be a hit at all. And a lot of things take you by surprise. So there are still movies that are stage adaptations, but we see a lot more of other emerging subgenres of musical films. So we get dance musicals and rock musicals. Dancicles. And there are lots of cult hits as well, like Rocky Horror Show.
And that's it.
Popular music has become more varied and accessible to people, and there are a lot more rock musicals on the screen. So you've got Jesus Christ Superstar and Tommy, and there's R&B musicals like The Wiz. Big musical films that we see are stage adaptations. So we got Fiddler on the Roof, which was a hit. It did quite well as a film, but it was massive on Broadway. It did so well on Broadway. You've got Cabaret, which fits into that more realistic style of filmmaking that started to emerge because they took the book numbers out and added more diegetic music and
changed the character of Sally Bowles.
Yeah, they changed the characters. Cliff was British as opposed to American, so they swapped the characters round. And
do you think that's to make it more appealing to Americans?
Possibly, because Sally becomes a bit more of an interesting... I don't know if there's something about her character. She's very exciting and slightly eccentric, and there's something about her that fits in with her character. Is better being American. I don't know why. I'm not saying British people can't be eccentric, but it just fits in better.
We invented it. When you think of Sally Bowles, do you think American woman or British woman? I
think of Liza Minnelli in the film. I've got the record over there. Yeah. I automatically just think of Liza Minnelli. I think everybody does when they think of Cabaret. That film is so iconic.
Do you prefer the stage show though?
I really enjoyed the stage show when I saw it. I wasn't sure whether I was going to, because I loved the film. The film was my first exposure to that musical, and I really do like Liza Minnelli in that role. I actually enjoyed it more on stage. It's got a huge Brechtian element, and that fits in with the kind of topic of the kind of criticism of the war, and kind of, you know,
works with the score, with the Kurt Weill influence and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it more hard hitting than the film, actually, because even though it's a really dark film on stage, I mean, there's a bit at the end where they send them all. I don't know if this is in every production, but there's a bit where all the characters come on and they're in a gas chamber, and it was so shocking and horrible to watch.
And I remember seeing it, I think it was at my school production. We literally had Nazis marching down the aisle of the theatre, and it lends itself, I think, better to theatre than it does to film. But it was a massive film.
Yeah, it was.
Award-winning, was it? Yeah.
Cabaret didn't win Best Picture, but it
still won awards, though, didn't it?
Yeah, Liza Minnelli won.
Yeah.
And you had, like, the ones you'd expect, like Best Music and Score and Sound and Best Film Editing and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, groundbreaking film in the sense that they're taking a stage musical and taking the book numbers out and done a few interesting things to it to make it more realistic.
Because they hadn't really tampered with musicals when they did the transfer, had they?
Not really, not as far as I know. But in contrast to Cabaret, which was, you know, a direct stage adaptation, obviously things taken out and changed, we get Jesus Christ Superstar, which was also a big hit on Broadway, but it flopped massively because the film was far too controversial, and you had like people protesting outside the theatres and cinemas and stuff. Even though that was a big hit, it doesn't necessarily mean because it's a hit in London or Broadway or it's going to be a hit in Hollywood. It doesn't mean anything. We got a lot of family films during this era which are successful, and it's that kind of Disney model thing again. You know, they're kind of family films, so they're not too controversial and they're going to get people in. So Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
And we can't forget also Disney throughout all these decades have been doing musicals.
Absolutely, and also a lot of their old films, their 40s and 50s films, were re-released in cinemas from like the 40s all the way to the beginning of the 80s until the Disney Renaissance. So yeah, Disney is still doing this, but there were a lot of very, very big family films in the 70s which were really popular. The Muppet movie started, and that's the beginning of, you know, that they make musical films, you know, live action musical films for right up until the 90s. The Wiz, great musical there, is an example of R&B and soul and gospel being shown in a Hollywood musical. But interestingly, Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in 1971 was never intended to be a musical, but they thought it'd be more financially successful if it did contain songs, which I think is interesting considering the climate of Hollywood and the fact that the Hollywood films falling out of favour, but maybe they thought that this would appeal more to children if it had songs in. I don't know. Those family films, like you say, it's the Disney model, and it's kind of aimed at children and families, so kind of few songs chucked in there are all right, and it's kind of makes them popular.
And we kind of had Mary Poppins Part 2 with Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
Yeah, so...
Big Nazis as well, so...
You can sort of see why those films would be successful. But then you've got things you just can't predict, like Rocky Horror Picture Show. It was a massive hit, and it's been a massive hit.
I don't think it was a success originally, but it became culty.
I think off the top of my head, like the critics just were completely utterly bewildered by it. But
Billy Wildered. Is that like Billy Wilder?
The critics were obviously completely bewildered by it, but it appealed to people that found themselves to be kind of on the edges of society and made them feel included.
And also it was completely everything the Hays Code
wasn't. Yeah, exactly.
So it was like this massive liberation of expression, which is what the film's all about, appearing. Have you ever been to a Rocky Horror Picture Show screening?
No, I haven't been to a screening.
So you would have to buy some suspenders and things and go and
I've got friends that have been.
And have your rice, and you got to say slut when Janet's mentioned and whatever when Brad's mentioned. I don't know.
The traditions.
So it became more about the audience than about the film.
Yeah.
No one was really watching the film. They were just there.
It's that community aspect.
Yeah, and I thought,
because these people that have found themselves, like I say, on the fringes of society, had somewhere to go and somewhere to be part of a community, which is why I think it's considered to be a bit of a cult film, because it's massive because of the word of mouth aspect of it spreading.
And it was recently remade as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
I think Fox did it.
I had no idea about that.
And it's appeared in Glee, and absolutely. It is an absolute icon.
And its popularity is endured, but it's one of those things. It's cool that it was so popular. So far we've had family musicals, we've had cult films, we've had those Broadway stage adaptations, but we also have another subgenre of musical films, which is dance musicals. So in 1977 we get Saturday Night Fever, which was the first musical era to be bang up to date and introduce disco music. Because like I've said...
Hang on. Do you consider it a musical? It's just a film with a really good soundtrack that people dance to.
I don't know, really. I don't know. Maybe
it was made into a stage show.
Maybe. People think of it as a musical because it's got John Travolta in it, and obviously he's massively involved. He was massively involved in Grease in 1978. Yeah. So when people look back at it, they kind of think it was a big... Because it obviously was known for Grease after that, they kind of look back at it and think it was a musical. And because it is now a musical, people think it's a musical. What's striking about Saturday Night Fever, even though it's not necessarily a musical, is that it's bang up to date. You know, we've said that Hollywood is often about 10 years behind what's going on, and that's actually a film that's bang up to date and actually has disco music. It's something that's really, really mainstream, so you can see why it was so popular, because they're not 10 years behind. So it's not happening in the 80s when like disco's just not capturing people's imaginations anymore. It's actually like bang on the curve as opposed to behind it.
And I think it's still the biggest selling soundtrack of all time.
That wouldn't surprise me, really. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. And everyone knows the dance moves, don't they? Everyone knows it.
She said doing the dance moves. For those of you not in the room.
But then we get Grease, which is like a massive hit, which just comes out of nowhere. It's got elements of a traditional musical in the sense that people just burst into songs spontaneously. It's not your cabaret thing where it's all kind of diegetic music.
But it was also changed very heavily from the stage shows. The original stage show was incredibly adult.
Yeah.
And it had the rape stuff, and it had the drugs, and it had the pregnancy, and it had all that kind of stuff. What it didn't have was a lot of the rock and roll songs taking on the model of Saturday Night Fever and putting a huge dance element.
Yeah. They
took real 50s rock and roll songs and put them into the film, so it became this weird mix of
nostalgia,
original songs, and pre-existing songs.
Yeah.
They got Olivia Newton-John's songwriter in, who's John Farrar, I think, to do You're the One That I Want, which is the big hit.
Yeah.
And the Four Seasons, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons came
did the opening number, but it's a bit weird when you look back on that, and a lot of people that were involved in the film say it sticks out like a sore thumb because it's so 70s.
Yeah.
And then you've got all this 50s stuff because it doesn't fit in with the theme tune doesn't fit in with the rest of it. I think most importantly about Grease, it just speaks to the young people at the time. I bet it was massive among the youth of the 70s.
And what a wonderful message as well.
Oh God, don't even get me
started.
But
I think that was parodying the 50s attitude.
It was parodying the 50s attitude. They weren't saying that this is all okay. And in fact, it was funny when Grease Live was done 2015, was it?
It was very good as well.
It was very good. I saw a few behind the scenes things, and they were saying how that ending of what's she called? Sandy having to change personality and become sexy in order to get the guy. They were saying they wanted to show Danny having to change who he is as well to kind of make it fairer or to make it more 21st century.
It's not Grease.
It's not, but it's not. It doesn't really fit in with the original, sort of idea of it. But also, you've got loads of young talent in the film as well, which appeals to young children, which appeared to young people at the time. You've got John Travolta, who's massive from Saturday Night Fever, and you've got Olivia Newton-John, who's already an established pop singer. So you can kind of see why you've got two big stars in there. You can see why people want to come to that film.
And they kept her Australian, which I kind of liked as well.
Yeah, so obviously she's not in the original set. Sure.
Sally Bowles syndrome all over again.
Yeah. Or maybe just she couldn't do an American accent. It also started in the 70s, get a lot of films that reflect on the golden era of Hollywood. We get That's Entertainment, which was released in 1974, which was released to celebrate MGM's 50th anniversary. I'm not sure if this is more of a documentary musical thing, but it featured archive footage from, of the Hollywood stars and Hollywood movies and stuff like that. And it was a throwback to all, to the heyday of MGM and Arthur Freed.
The heyday.
The heyday. And, there was the segments of the film were introduced by Frank Sinatra and Gene Kelly and Fred Astaire and Bing Crosby and Debbie Reynolds and Liza Minnelli because her mum had died. And there's also another film from 1977 called New York, New York, which stars Liza Minnelli and Robert De Niro. A lot of the elements of this film hark back to the old movies, and A Star Is Born is particularly echoed. We obviously It's a Judy Garland film, and her daughter Liza is in the film. So there's lots of like parallels with A Star Is Born. I think you could argue that La La Land isn't really anything new, because there was a film in 1977 which was already looking back to the Hollywood era and trying to...
Gave us a better song.
Well, that's the thing, because this film I'm talking about, New York, New York, was actually a flop. It was really badly received, but you could argue at least it gave us one good song, yeah. New York, New York. So you've got these movies that are reflecting the golden era, but you've also got films that are parodying the Hollywood era, like Blazing Saddles and Movie. So, and
also Mel Brooks, the producers, I think, in the 60s, which also was... But he's always loved parodying musicals. So
that's the end of the 70s, and, you know, throughout the 80s, there are still movie musicals made. They're kind of big musicals, again, mostly stage adaptations. There's nothing really particularly new. Footloose is a new film that came out in 1984. Appealed to young people because it had upbeat modern music in it, and it was written as a new musical written for the screen, because I think that's something we haven't seen. A lot of the films from the 70s were all stage adaptations in some form or another. Even the really big hits like Grease was a stage adaptation. But Footloose is probably the first film for quite a while that captures people's imagination is a new musical for the screen, whereas a lot of the other hits from the era...
It's so 80s, isn't it?
Yeah, it's so 80s. So appealing to the youth at the time. Whereas you've got other adaptations which are stage adaptations, or Fame, which I think is an adaptation from a TV show. So, you know, things that still, again, they have an audience because they have an audience. Annie has an audience on Broadway. Again, it's the Disney model. It's a family-friendly movie, but they still have to make changes to it to make it appeal to an audience, to make it a bit more exciting for the screen.
But certainly the year of the Dancercle, wasn't it? With Fame, Flashdance, Footloose, and other various things beginning with F. Footloose
is a dance musical. I don't think Flashdance is a musical. I think it's got music in it, and it's got a great soundtrack, but it's not necessarily a musical, although I think it has been made into a musical, hasn't it?
Yes.
Flashdance. So, you know, we're still getting hits, and a couple of movies in this era are still nominated for Oscars, but none of them for Best Picture Oscar.
No.
Fame gets 6 Oscar nominations, but mostly for the sound and the music as opposed to Best Picture. Annie, again, similar, gets Oscar nominations, but mostly for music and sound. Chorus Line is a huge flop in 1985. Barely makes back half.
Well, you can see why, can't you?
Yeah.
Because it's a show that belongs only in the theatre.
On the stage.
At that time.
You get Little Shop of Horrors in 1986, which was a huge, huge hit and actually did very well at the box office.
With its changed ending.
So in the 80s in particular, you see musical theatre films that are being developed, usually stage adaptations, but they have to have changes made to them in order to probably get financed and in order to, intrigue people and get them in.
For Little Shop of Horrors, we all know they filmed the original ending at vast expense.
That's what I mean.
Then they had test audiences and things.
And people didn't like the film ending. So again, but they still had to change it to make it more appealing to people.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether it would have done as well as it did if they hadn't changed the ending because of the climate at the time.
We'll find out when the remake happens.
Yeah, and if they added the original ending into there. When I looked into the 80s, I didn't really find many things. It's not as interesting as the 70s. It's not as kind of eclectic and strange as the 70s. It's kind of just a lot of family films and a lot of films that kind of already have an audience.
But something massive happened in 1989, didn't it?
The Disney Renaissance.
Yes.
So A Little Mermaid was released with music by Alan Menken and lyrics by Howard Ashman.
Or The Little Mermaid.
The Little Mermaid, yeah. And then obviously that kind of triggered the Disney Renaissance, and a lot of films had been re-released, like I said, in cinemas from the 40s and 50s. But now we're starting to see some Disney animated musicals released. In 1989, you get The Little Mermaid, but in 1991, you get Beauty and the Beast, which is the first animated film to be nominated for a Best Picture Oscar, which is incredible. You had all these musicals in the 70s and 80s, which all failed to win a Best Picture Oscar or even get nominated for a Best Picture Oscar. And there's Beauty and the Beast, the first animated film to be nominated for Best Picture. I might be right in saying that because of films like Beauty and the Beast, that's why they have a Best Picture, animated picture Oscar category. Yeah. So these films, particularly, Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, they trigger an appetite for more animated musical films, and there's loads through the 90s. You've got Pocahontas in 1995, The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1996, one a year pretty much from then onwards. And then obviously the DreamWorks animated studios set up to rival Disney, and you get The Prince of Egypt released in 1998, because they've seen there's an appetite for animated movie musicals, and they think we've got to jump on this.
Well, the opening is wonderful. It's a true epic Stephen Schwartz 8-minute beautiful plot-driven number, and Hans Zimmer did a lot of the music as well.
Yeah.
But apparently it's planned for the stage.
Oh, right. I had no idea about that. Because I'm not surprised you've said that, because a lot of the Disney films were so big that they resulted in stage shows being developed. So it kind of goes the other way now. So as opposed to stage shows influencing the movies are now influencing the stage shows, and you get huge... so, we've seen loads of Disney productions, like The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast.
What was interesting is in the 90s, Disney had a flop called Newsies.
Yeah.
Which was very popular with teenage girls at the time because of the chorus of 300 dancing teenage boys in it that I'm sure did no harm. But another great Alan Menken music with Jack Feldman doing the lyrics. Mm-hmm. Of course, we all know that went on to play at the Paper Mill Playhouse in New Jersey, then it went to Broadway, limited run, got extended, and then they filmed the stage show and put it in the cinema.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's what we're going to talk about. A bit is developed from an idea that develops later on in the 90s of filming stage shows and then going direct to video. And now there's the technology to put them in cinemas. But it's funny you say about Newsies, because it was such a massive flop. I mean, the budget was 15 million and the box office return was about 2.8 million. And it's actually still had a life beyond that film. It's had a stage show.
Ironically won Alan's only Tony Award.
Though there you are. So that's interesting. So you've got the Hollyood animated films inspiring the stage. And that's a trend that's continued since the 90s into the noughties. You've got all the dance musical films that have come over into to the stage, and you've had loads and loads of Hollywood film adaptations. Roman Holiday's been adapted, Amelie's been adapted, Anastasia's been adapted on Broadway. So you've got loads of things going on.
We're excited about An American in Paris. Was that a stage show originally?
So American Paris was inspired by the 1951 musical. It opened on Broadway in 2015.
We can't wait, can we?
No, I'm really excited. I want to go. Can't wait. Despite the fact that you have this huge boom in animated movie musicals, there's still some enormous musical flops, the live action musical flops. I mean, Evita, which was a huge, huge success in the 80s. So even though it had Madonna starring in it, it got very mixed reviews and didn't really capture people's imaginations.
I don't think the sung-through concept works in
I
film.
agree with you. And
plus it's just a dull score.
Certain things that don't capture people's imaginations, I think it's probably down to a couple of elements of the film not being right. And I think it takes them a while to get this balance of realism within the musical film, which appeals to a modern day audience, and the element of it being a little bit stylistic as well. Towards the end of the 90s, we see a lot of musicals being made for television and direct-to-video musicals, like Cats' stage show being released on video. And
Gypsy and Annie were two big, done by Disney, ABC, made for television, and they were absolutely massive successes. I don't know why.
Well, probably because people could watch musicals from the comfort of their own home without having to go to the movie theatre or the theatre.
And then Cinderella was another very interesting one. Now, in the 50s, it was the kind of first made-for-television musical, and then they did it again in the 90s with Brandy or someone,
and Whitney Houston and Whoopi Goldberg and Bernadette Peters, and the direct-to-TV thing has kind of been successful. And it's always been a thing, though. It's always been massive. I mean, think about A Mile and the Night Visitors, which is an opera, which was written for TV. There was lots and lots of TV operas, things written for TV. A lot of Britain's operas written for TV. That kind of live action musical aspect, still it's been popular to people since the 50s and 60s, because people can watch things from the comfort of their own home. Then we kind of get to the noughties, which has been what I've labelled as the resurgence of the Hollywood film. And I think this starts with Moulin Rouge in 2001. Baz Luhrmann is obviously known for not being particularly confined with regards to realism. I think that's been the kind
Say that again.
I think it's because that has been, in my opinion, sort of one of the enemies of the musical film from the 70s to now, to the noughties. And Baz Luhrmann kind of just, he's one of those people, I think he just has an idea in his head and he just does it. He doesn't care what's going on. I think he doesn't think about trends. He just has this incredible idea and he just does it. And I think that's why Moulin Rouge was so exciting, because it was just so spectacular and surreal. Spectacular. It was surreal almost and quite exciting.
I hated it.
Oh, I love that film.
Absolutely despised
How could you hate it? It's so
I
good.
felt ill.
Well, I love Baz Luhrmann for a start. I loved his Romeo and Juliet adaptation, you know I love Strictly Ballroom. I'm obsessed with that film. And also the comedy aspect of Strictly Ballroom is very over the top. And I think that's the aspect of, he's taken some of the best bits of the Hollywood musical in Moulin Rouge, like the very over-the-top numbers, and they just suddenly burst into song, and you've got the moon singing as an opera singer in 1 minute, and they're flying, and you've got, it's incredible, and the stage and the staging and the costumes are just so incredible.
It's everything La La Land should have been.
Yeah.
And I remember saying when I first saw footage of La La Land, I thought, it's very like Moulin Rouge, and there is a bit in La La Land which I'm sure you have heard of or seen, which is the flying sequence, which I don't know if it's paying reference to an earlier Hollywood musical, but it was very, very, very like La La Land. However, I didn't like Moulin Rouge because it was too much. I've always said it belongs on stage, and now it is.
It's rumoured to be coming.
No,
it is coming.
Going to Broadway.
Oh, that's good.
And I think it'll be much better there. You know, Baz Luhrmann directed La Bohème as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I know. Well, because Alfie Boe was in it, and I've read his book. Moulin Rouge. I think, even though you don't like it, I think it did capture people's imaginations because it was so different. Yeah. And again, it was pushing back against that realism thing that had, like I said, been a bit of a problem for the musical film. Although it didn't have an original score, so despite the fact it was an original concept for a film, it was a jukebox musical.
No, but it did what I applaud jukebox musicals for doing, which is taking songs and rearranging them to work. I mean, who'd ever thought... To work
with the narrative.
Who'd ever thought that Roxanne would work as a tango?
No, it's incredible. I do, and that's one of the reasons why I really like the film, despite the fact that it is a jukebox musical. It's a good one. I know, and it was nominated for Best Picture, and Nicole Kidman was nominated for Best Actress. So it did capture people's imaginations.
Doing her best Marilyn Monroe impression.
Yeah, it was exciting to people, and it was starting to capture people's imagination. And we've had a couple of years where a couple of films, they get a bit of Oscar attention here and there, but this is a film which was a bit more mainstream than some of those other kind of hits, which kind of might be only appealing to children or only might be appealing to certain communities in society, like Rocky Horror Show was. Here's a film which is more mainstream, and it's got big stars in it, like Ewan McGregor. And so, this is the era where you see a lot of Hollywood stars that might not necessarily be associated with singing. There was always that in the 40s and 50s when you had people that were dubbed, but you did have your really big stars. But now, because of autotune, people can.
Emma Watson can sing Beauty and the Beast.
That you can get big names into films, so that's how you get them financed. That's how they're getting these big Hollywood films financed, because you can do them now.
Or if you're Chicago, you just get someone who's done West End before.
I love Catherine Zeta-Jones in that film. I've loved that film for such a long time. I think it's an incredible film. Have you seen Chicago?
Yes, many, many times. I think Catherine Zeta-Jones is wonderful.
I think Renee Zellweger is just... I think she's fantastic in that film, actually. She does a great job of singing.
And I saw the show and I was very confused because Roxy is blonde in the film and Velma Kelly is brunette, but in the stage show they're the other way around. Well,
in the stage show I saw after the film came out, they'd kind of reversed that. I think it depends on who's singing the role.
But that was such a wonderful concept.
I think what's wonderful about Chicago is... what's different about Chicago as opposed to Moulin Rouge? Moulin Rouge goes with the whole kind of surreal, not realistic aspect, and Chicago kind of takes a few tips from Cabaret, and some of the music becomes diegetic, like all that jazz. She's in the club and Velma Kelly is performing,
then Roxy's performing for a brief second.
But then a lot of the things happen in her head. So again, there is a slightly surreal aspect, but some of the music is more diegetic. The characters don't necessarily always suddenly burst into song unless it's completely necessary. A lot of it happens in her imagination when they burst into song, so it's kind of justified. The non-realistic aspect of them bursting into song is in Roxy's imagination.
A lot of it comes from the stage show, like the brilliant ventriloquist scene.
Yeah, exactly. You can see why that might be a musical film which appeals to people, because it doesn't grate on you that all of a sudden these people burst into song for no reason. The reason that the people burst into song is because it's happening in her imagination, which is very, very clever.
And plus... Catherine Zeta-Jones, Renee Zellweger, Richard Gere, Queen Latifah, Bill C. Riley. We are seeing a lot of Hollywood A-list people do musicals. So it kind of makes them more credible. So you got these two big movie musicals at the beginning of the noughties, which I think just kind of makes the genre cool again, and it makes
Hollywood A-listers think, hey, I can do that.
It's a chorus line.
And we get practically 1 or 2 a year, which just is, big hits. We're not talking about a film, 1 or 2 films every year, and some of them are popular, some of them are not. These are big popular films that have happened.
But no original musicals, though.
Original musicals.
One.
Yeah, which is High School Musical, which was written for the television.
Yes.
So not really even a movie musical in the sense it was on the big screen.
Until La La Land.
Yeah. And what have we had since Chicago? I mean, we've had Phantom of the Opera, which people argue isn't as successful as the stage version, and there are some bit cringy moments in it.
Looks good, though.
Stunning. Even though Maria Bjornson did such an amazing job for theatre at designing the the staircase so that it looked like there were a lot more people on it than there actually is. On the film, you don't have to worry about that. You can fill it with as many people as you like, and it's stunning. And the masquerade moment, there are hundreds of people, and all the costumes just look spectacular. And there's that element that you just don't get on the stage, on the screen. But at the same time, the performances for me were not good in that film, and that's what you get on the stage. You get an amazing performance. So there are things you get from the films that you don't get from the theatre, and vice versa. Rent in 2005.
Next.
Dreamgirls, which is interesting. Dreamgirls was groundbreaking in the 80s anyway, because it was obviously an R&B musical on Broadway, and it was a musical that was based around the African American community and was telling an African American story, which a lot of musicals hadn't done to that point, and it didn't get made to film to 2006. But again, a huge cast. I mean, you've got Beyonce playing one of the lead roles in that, and then Jennifer Hudson wins her Oscar for Best Actress for that. And you just, it's just a shame, I guess, that they took. Well, maybe it's not a shame they took to the noughties. It kind of came back at a time when the musical film was credible again. So it's quite nice. I don't think that film could have been made without some of those credible people in it, and I highly recommend it. It's a really good film. And then Hairspray, which was a film first.
It was a non-musical film.
Non-musical film first, yeah.
In the 80s.
Yeah.
And then the stage show came, and then they made the stage show. So it's like the producer's life story.
Yeah.
Non-musical film with the songs in it.
Yeah.
Then it was made into a stage show. Then they did the stage show into a film. Then, if you're Hairspray's case, you get an extra little bit of pudding on top when you get a TV film made for it.
Well, that was Hairspray is a big, huge hit. It's kind of nostalgic, and it's all about the 60s and things.
It's like Grease 2 or 3.
Yeah, but at the same time, it was really appealing to people. It really captured people's imaginations. But I think with Hairspray, despite the fact it's kind of nostalgic and it's 60s and it might not appeal to kind of young people, I think the storyline appeals to young people.
Yeah, it still does.
And it's still really relevant today as well, especially with all the stuff going on in America. So I think the civil rights movement enticed people into watching because it's so interesting. And then you got Sweeney Todd, which was done in a way where this was in 2007, so Sweeney Todd in 2007 happens, and they'd managed to do things with the film that they can't necessarily do on the stage. Like, you can't necessarily show it so graphically on the stage. I mean, I know there have been productions where there is blood and things like that, but in the film you can do it as though it's a proper horror movie. And I think that's the thing, and you've got the equipment and the techniques to be able to do that.
But again,
on the stage.
massive stars.
Your massive stars, Helena Bonham Carter, you've got Johnny Depp singing. I mean,
and also
that's
back
incredible.
to Hairspray, John Travolta again, Christopher Walken, and massive load of like Zac Efron going back to High School Musical. It appeals to every single generation of the family.
Yeah, exactly. And like Mamma Mia as well. What Mamma Mia has for it is the fact that the ABBA songs appeal to the older generation, and the ABBA are so fantastically famous anyway. But you've got young people in the film, like Amanda Seyfried was in it, and is that how you pronounce her name?
Probably.
I think she's really, really popular with younger people. And then you've got Meryl Streep in it. I mean, Meryl Streep is someone who appeals to younger people and older people. I mean, who would not want to see Meryl Streep singing? And that had a massive cast. Colin Firth. Is it Colin Firth? Yeah, Colin Firth. And what's he called?
James Bond.
What's he called? Pierce Brosnan.
Yeah, the fabulous Christina Baranski from famous for being Leonard Hofstadter's mother in The Big Bang Theory, but also who was in the film of Chicago as Mary Sunshine, whatever her name was.
Yeah, and okay, some of the singing was a bit naff in Mamma Mia, but you can kind of forgive them because the whole thing is a bit cheesy.
The whole marriage of big bit naff and Mamma Mia kind of goes hand in hand.
Les Mis is serious. You can't get away with a naff performance, so unfortunately Russell Crowe singing is really cringe in that film.
I even thought Hugh Jackman's singing wasn't great.
Well, it's because he's not a tenor.
Right.
He's a baritone, and he's fantastic. If you've seen him in Oklahoma singing, he's gorgeous. So he couldn't sing some of the higher moments in Bring Him Home. He would have been better as Javert, and they should have cast a proper tenor for Jean Valjean's part. In 2014, we get Into the Woods. And again, because of the film medium, I think there were exciting things they could do with the Into the Woods film that they couldn't have done, when it was first released on Broadway and things like that. And you got big names, you got James Corden and Emily Blunt in it, and Meryl Streep again. This is down to Moulin Rouge and Chicago for making the movie musical credible again. It's probably down to those two musicals that these movie musicals happened. And that La La Land happened, and that the Beauty and the Beast remake happened. All these kind of
Little
things.
Mermaid remake, and the Aladdin remake, and the Hunchback remake,
and the fact that there's Miss Saigon rumoured and Wicked rumoured, Wicked's rumoured, and
Wicked is happening.
Oh yeah, I know
that's
that's not rumoured now; it's confirmed. Yeah, that's what I mean. All these, I think it's down to the beginning of the noughties and those two films. I can't remember any more musical films that are rumoured. There's the Little Shop of Horrors remake. What else is there?
Mostly remakes.
It's a lot of remakes. That's the trope at the moment, isn't it? Remake after remake. It's going to get a little bit tiresome after a while. With Beauty and the Beast, I think I'm really excited about this film. I can't deny. I've seen it.
Stop right there. That's why they're doing it.
I've seen the trailer. That's why they're doing it. I've seen the trailer and I'm just like, But then again, you could argue, why are they remaking something so iconic and perfect in the first place? Why does there need to be a live action remake of the film?
Why do there need to be a stage show?
True. I mean, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. You could argue it doesn't really need to be remade. I think West Side Story's even been rumoured to be remade, which I think would work in a more modern context, especially in the political climate we're in right now in America. That could work really well if it was updated to the modern day. But if they're just going to make a remake of the original film, you don't need to remake that, guys. It's perfect. It's perfect. Just leave it alone.
You get Ariana Grande to play Maria.
Don't say it.
Zac Efron to play Tony.
Jesus, he can't sing high enough because he was dubbed in High School Musical, because he couldn't reach the high notes.
By Marnie Nixon.
No. The movie musical's been made more credible again. Even though in the 90s you had a couple of stage musicals, like I said, direct-to-video things you could watch at home. There are stage musicals being screened to cinemas now as well. Like you've said, Newsies relatively recently has been in the cinema, and you've had, the Les Mis 25th anniversary concert screened live to cinemas, and Miss Saigon live to cinemas, and Billy Elliot live to cinemas. There's an appetite for it now. There's an appetite because there's been a resurgence in the genre, and people are interested. It's still a subgenre though, because there are so many genres of film. I think it's got more credibility now than it has had since the golden era.
Because I'm so old, I remember sitting through the 90s waiting for film musicals to come out again.
Yeah, so there's an appetite. So there's these stage musicals being screened and TV musicals. So we've got musicals coming right into the home again, like live performances, like Grease Live and The Sound of Music Live.
Glee
were enormous.
And also, yes, there's Simpsons and there's Family Guy and there's the South Park. And so there's we could do another 2-part episode on the history of TV musicals.
Yeah, but let's go back to La La Land to finish off. Do you think
must we? Okay, right.
Is it anything new? That's the question we're kind of leaving this with.
I think it's new in the fact that it's bad.
Don't say that.
No, because that's one of the things. It was about normal people, and there's very little effort to be big and belty. There's the audition song, which I will admit was very nice. No, it doesn't do anything new, and it didn't want to. Because it was a tribute to the older stuff. But
then you have that worry that it doesn't do it as well as that.
No,
it doesn't do it as well.
It doesn't, but some people thought it did. You will love it when you see it because there are so many references to all the...
It's going to be like a Where's Wally of all the old Hollywood films.
and I didn't get that.
Yeah.
So part of the thing was missing for me, but what was missing for me were the songs.
Yeah. But even though it's like I say, it's like a Where's Wally excitement of, that's that film, that was that film. I still want a good score. I still want a good score. I still want good songs. I still want good performances. And even though it might kind of parody those, amazing movie musicals, if you're going to do something that parodies those amazing movie musicals, it's got to be as good, if not better.
I think Family Guy has better old-fashioned musical songs than La La Land.
Catchy ones that you could still sing. Yeah.
And what annoyed me most about La La Land is for an hour, it wasn't a musical.
Yeah, in the middle. I've still not seen it. I know so much about this film, I almost feel like I don't need to see it. I almost feel like I don't need to.
Already.
But that's the problem, because I've heard too much negativity about it. I do kind of hate it. I feel like I hate it already, but I'm trying to be open-minded.
It's acted very well. It's made very well. It's just not a musical.
Can you see why the trends have led up to it to now? Do you think you can see how we've ended up with La La Land, or do you don't see the hype around it? Because, you know, Moulin Rouge and Chicago, which were such massive pictures, and you can see why they were so good and why people were so enticed by them.
I think there's more hype for everything nowadays because of social media. You know, the Beauty and the Beast trailer can be up, and within an hour it can have 3.1 million views on Facebook alone, not considering YouTube and Vimeo and all this other kind of stuff. So there's more people telling you to do things. And it's the same thing with Book of Mormon. When that obviously and Hamilton, they played previously. The minute it comes to our shores, we have to see this because it's the greatest thing. And if you don't see it, you're not going to be able to, you know, function in human life. And I don't really go for that kind of hype.
Yeah.
Because you and I grew up at times when we didn't have that. We saw things because they were credible.
As opposed to, you must see this film, because we grew up before.
So I think its hype is a product of its time.
Do you think it will have longevity?
No.
That's the thing that's interesting.
Especially now it hasn't won Best
Picture.
Well, it nearly did. But
it nearly did, yeah. I think if it had won Best Picture, I think it would have been forgotten in about 5 to 10 years' time. I don't think it would have the longevity that Beauty and the Beast, for example, does.
Now, if it goes to Broadway, I think that's a different story.
Yes, and there is rumours that is the case.
It just needs to be written again as a musical.
Yeah. Well, it would need. You couldn't have a whole hour in the middle where there are no songs. I think people would get very cross about that. Is there an audience there for it on Broadway, do you think?
Yes, because I think you can do a lot more theatrically with it. It's the same as Moulin Rouge. It belongs on Broadway. I even think Nightmare Before Christmas belongs more
that would
on,
be a great
on stage.
film on Broadway.
And I'm sure that'll happen eventually. I didn't hate La La Land. I just got annoyed by it because it wasn't what I was A, told it was, and B, expected it to be.
Because they've really marketed it as a musical. It's like the opposite effect Sweeney Todd had. It's like, this is a musical, and this is, you know,
People walked out of La La Land because there were no songs. People walked out of Sweeney Todd because
there were songs.
There were Stephen Sondheim songs.
Yeah. I think as well, people nowadays care less about what the critics think as well.
Good night, everybody.
Yeah. It's word of mouth, and despite the fact, I mean, even though critics have loved this film, there's been a lot of backlash against the critics regarding it. You know, people are not really interested in what they have to say anymore. And
even critics who gave it 5 stars originally are now writing saying,
I'm not quite sure about this. Yeah, because of the audience reaction to it.
Also, there's been a lot of discussion about the racial issues and things and how it is.
Yeah,
you know,
very white.
It's very white, especially a film that claims to be about jazz.
Which brings me to say, if it had won Best Picture, do you think there would have quite a bit of backlash regarding, you know, because there was the Oscars So White thing.
What's your theory on this?
On Facebook this morning.
Yelled at me at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Well, I was a bit cross on Facebook this morning when I saw somebody say that Moonlight only won Best Picture because it's about black issues, which is completely wrong. It wasn't nominated for Best Picture because it's about black people, and it's not a reaction to the Oscar So White campaign, because that film was in production before all this controversy kind of kicked off. It's won Best Picture because it was the better picture. I worry slightly that people will think that it's had its kind of gloss taken off the win. It's not as exciting for the people that won the picture because of what happened at the Oscars, and I worry that people will say that's why it's won the Oscar and that's why people have been nominated for certain awards this year, when it's just not true. People have been nominated for awards because they're good.
I'll be honest, I had never heard of Moonlight until this morning, which I guess is sometimes they will give the underdog the winner. They did it with Avenue Q versus Wicked and Lion King versus Ragtime.
Well, it was the underdog because La La Land has been so big, but it is a better film from whatever all the critics have said. But also as well, like, there's been this whole thing about La La Land at the moment, and it's like, oh, we need films like La La Land because we're all so depressed, but we also need films like Moonlight and Hidden Figures, which are about really important issues. Especially in Trump's America, where there's a lot of backlash against you because of your sex or your skin colour. You need these films as well. You need hard-hitting films that make people think. You need films like Moonlight, probably more than you need films like La La Land. These films are probably more important.
And more Randy Rainbow, please.
Yes, huge fans of Randy Rainbow. If you don't know what we're talking about, Google Randy Rainbow, you'll love it. It's great.
Well, thank you for taking me down the yellow brick road of film musicals.
My iPad has died. We've talked for so long.
I did.
I did.
I'm going to be talking with Thos next week about The Girls, which is the new Tim Firth and Gary Barlow musical, which I will tease you with, which I thoroughly enjoyed. Do go and see it, Tonya, because it will have a lot in it for you, if only the scene about cakes.
Ooh! Oh yeah, well there will be a scene about cake, won't there? I do love the film, so I definitely... And it's all about Yorkshire, where I'm from, so...
Yes.
It's like perfect.
Even though it's written by someone from Lancashire.
Well, we won't talk about that bit.
Thank you very, very much for listening. It has been a brilliant journey, and many, many more film musicals to come, I hope.
That certainly looks like it's the way it's going, doesn't it?
Yeah. Speak to you next week. Thank you.
Bye! We have a lot of family films which are successful doing... Don't yawn!
Sorry. Ow.
What's different about
Chicanery. Chicabaret.